Life is often so busy, taking us here, there, seemingly everywhere. When you aren't able to make it to church, we hope you are fed and nourished by listening to the preaching of God's Word wherever you are at the moment. In the meantime, take care, and God bless.
We continue our series, What's the Point? And today we talk about vocation, not vacation. Vocation. So one day a little girl was given a snack in the afternoon, an apple. And she started to eat the apple, and as little kids are wont to do, she got waylaid by something else, and so she put down the apple and decided to squirrel, go play with something else. And she came back to said apple, and she noticed that it had turned brown. Being inquisitive at her age, she walked up to her mom and said, "Mom, why do apples turn brown?" An important caveat of the story is that the mom in this case is a scientist. She loves how the world works, and she saw in this little girl a little her. And so she thought maybe because of the question, she's going to be a scientist just like me. So to the question, "Mom, why do apples turn brown?" the scientist, who's also a mom, said, "That's not my slide." She didn't say that. She said this: "This unappetizing phenomenon is actually due to a chain of biochemical reactions known as enzymatic browning. When the skin is comprised, the plant tissue is exposed to oxygen. This triggers the enzyme known as polyphenol oxidase. This results in new chemicals, which then react with amino acids to produce brown-colored melanins." Mom, why do apples turn brown? We in the church use a lot of big words because we're smart. I know that there are Latin derivatives and all those things, but we have big words, I know, because I went to school. And we have these things like, for example, if you're going to go in the paradigm of the mom and the daughter, you have the mom saying sanctification, and the daughter would say, "Yeah, we're made holy." Or the mom would say justification, and the daughter would say, "Yeah, we're made right with God." Or incarnation, the mom would say, and the little girl would say, "Jesus is God in the flesh." Or absolution, the mom would say, and the little girl would say, "Forgiveness of sins." The mom would say redemption, and the little girl would say, "Jesus saved our hides." Feel me? A lot of shuns going on, right? Shun, 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 shun. But there's a simpler meaning. Today we are having another shun, vocation. And so when I have trouble understanding something, I go to a particular book. It's called Crazy Talk, a not-so-stuffy dictionary of theological terms. Rolf Jacobson is the editor. He's one of my very best friends. He wrote it also with the Reverend Dr. Hans Wursma, one of my dear friends, and his brother, the Reverend Carl Jacobson, also one of my best friends, and a couple others that I know tangentially. In 2 weeks, I'm going to be spending my week with my friends, and so I'll ask them then whether or not I can quote their book now. They'll get over it if they have a problem. So here's how they define vocation. The thing you do that was given to you to do in the way you do for the benefit of those you are doing it for. Now, because they're my friends, you know that they're sarcastic and you think they're just tongue-in-cheek. But actually, I contend that if you're going to look up a definition of vocation, this is the very best, because you need to read it again. It's not only just comes off your tongue, it is also very true. The thing that you do that was given to you to do, and the way that you do for the benefit of those you are doing it for. They continue, the word comes from a Latin term, vocare, meaning calling, which implies a caller, namely God. God calls more than just pastors. God calls each of us, gives us many gifts, and gives us a lift up by means of the Spirit. Actually, we all have more than one vocation. Our Christian vocation includes our jobs, our roles as family members, our roles as friends, as neighbors, as citizens, and so on. Vocation is all about loving the neighbor and serving in God's name. So, what's the point of vocation? The thing you do that was given you to do, to be done in the way that you all do for the benefit of those you are doing it for. I could end right now by quoting my friends. Awkward. What did I do with the rest of my week? I thought of 3 points. We have been created and shaped by God to be who and what we are. We have been created and shaped by God to be who and what we are. In my second call, Incarnation Lutheran Church in Shoreview, North Oaks, I went to a synod assembly. It's where you go and you vote for things and you talk to one another. It was in a neighboring large congregation. I had just arrived in Incarnation and we were in this big sanctuary and we were debating something. I don't remember, it's too long ago. And people get up and they stand in front of a microphone and they express their opinions, their views. Now, most of the people there are clergy, and so they're confident, they're mighty, and if they're for, they speak in a certain way. If they're against, they usually turn up the volume and they move their arms and they're gregarious. But this one gentleman came up to the microphone and he was speaking into the microphone, but you could barely even hear him. And he just stood there, kind of slumped over. And you could tell that he was a learned man. You could tell that he had some schooling and he actually had a lot of viewpoints, but it was hard to hear him. And so I leaned over to somebody who was seated at the table. It was all the people from Incarnation, and I've always been the way that I am. So I looked and I said, "Does anybody know this guy?" And the person next to me leaned over and whispered and said, "Well, you're new here. Everybody else in this entire assembly knows him but you." And then she told me his name. He was actually the senior pastor of this very large congregation. And I'd heard about this man for decades and decades of my life. And I thought, I just learned something. Because he was so quiet. He was so quiet you could hardly hear him. That I never thought that he would be a charismatic leader who, when I looked him up for this sermon, he has a Wikipedia page. I don't have a Wikipedia page, and I'm louder, and I'm more brash, and you can always hear me. And this dear man, who was a great leader, was quiet, but also mighty and strong. The point is, be yourself. Everybody else is taken. Parenthetically, embrace your skills, your talents, your demeanor, what you bring to any given situation. Be who you are. If you're in investment banking, you don't have to be a certain way to be an investment banker. Be the kind of investment banker you are, or fill in the blank. And you and I many times will try to embody what we think. People will tell me, "You seem like a pastor." What does that mean? Or some people say, "You don't seem like a pastor." It's like, you don't seem very nice. Because there is no one template, no one boilerplate. Because the man who was speaking into that microphone accomplished things that I don't even dare dreaming of accomplish because he was comfortable in himself. The Holy Bible puts it this way. Now there are varieties of gifts, but the same Spirit. There are varieties of services, but the same Lord. And there are varieties of activities, but it is the same God who activates all of them in everyone. To each is given the manifestation. See, there's another shun. What does that mean? It means a clear appearance of the Spirit for the common good. You've heard this how many different times? Now I want you to hear it in a different light. It just means girls who are in high school, boys who are in high school or college, or young adults, or people in middle age or old age, be who you're created to be. Be your authentic self. So in seminary, and I don't know what they do now, they've actually shortened it from 4 years to 2 years. Maybe because they figured out all of us didn't turn out that great, so you might as well just spend less time. But actually, my friend Rolf Jacobson that I quoted is the head of the program, so I know it's good. But twice during seminary, we would have to be matriculated. It sounds like waterboarding. You were matriculated. And why is that? Because you're in seminary. You can't call it an interview because you're going to be holy. So 2 times they would matriculate us. What is that? They would interview us. They would take people. I was assigned to southeastern Minnesota. They asked 6 or 7 lay people, and there was one professor who sat in, and then they grilled you on this little stage to see whether or not you should make it to the next. It's like American Idol, whether or not you pass this test. And I'm there. We go through some pleasantries, and I nailed them. And then a woman from Owatonna. No, I'm not bitter. I don't hold a grudge. A woman from Owatonna, Minnesota asked the question. She said, "Can you please tell me your call story?" What's a call story? A call story is when you're a pastor, they ask you, he or she, how did God call you into ministry? They don't ask engineers at Starkey about that. They should, but they ask a pastor because apparently there's a right answer. But I gave my answer. And what I said is basically paraphrasal, but very close. I, in my own mind, thought a long time ago about the image of being marinated in the Lutheran church. I actually said, I was like a big piece of chicken that was marinated in this chicken soup. Because my dad was a pastor and I grew up in a parsonage. My mom was a church organist. She directed the choir. I went to church twice my entire life. I was raised for it. However, I thought about becoming a psychologist. I also went to Hollywood, gave that a try, but I came back and Larry Woolroby told me at seminary, I know your dad, just give it a try, and if it doesn't work, you can quit and do something else. So I told my story, because it's my story. The woman from Owatonna looked at me and said, "I don't like your call story." Now, I've always been me. I'm a nice guy, but if I'm authentic and I say what needs to be said, I'm not going to back down. I'm not going to tell you a lie. I'm not going to tell you a half-truth. It's always a lot easier to remember what you say when you tell the truth, as well as it's just the right thing to do. So I know that Paul was walking along the road and he was a bad dude, and then he became blind, and then he woke up from this, and then he became a good dude, and so I could have actually said something like that, but it's not my story. And so there was this pregnant, awkward pause because I was counting to 10. I was born in the morning, but I wasn't born at night, late at night, if you will, and so I'm not stupid. I tried to couch it the best I could, but I looked at her and I said, "It's my call story, not yours." And that's all I said. Again, there was another pause. And I thought, well, I should go and become a psychologist, or maybe I can go back to Hollywood because this is not going well. And there was an assigned professor. You guys will know who went to seminary where I went. The Reverend Dr. Pat Kiefert was seated in a chair. The head of the department that taught systematic theology. He was the gruffest, the roughest professor you could have. His nickname could have been Chainsaw. He was also a professor at Hamlin Law. Yeah, he's that guy. He's that smart. He takes a breath. I can't breathe because he's going to speak. And he says, "David told us his call story. That's good enough for me. Let's move on." 7 years later, I went to Incarnation Lutheran Church, and I was the pastor of Dr. Pat Kiefert and his wife, Dr. Kiefert, who's a medical doctor and became our first child's pediatrician, and I became a family friend. The point, however, is this chainsaw of a professor didn't do me a favor. He did his vocation. The thing you do and the way that you do things for the well-being of your neighbor, because Dr. Kiefert was right. It was my call story, not somebody else's. It's not something to argue about or judge. Now, some 30-some years later, I say, among all the people, I say, thank you, Dr. Kiefert, for doing your vocation. Number 2, bloom where you are planted. Don't worry, not every point is this long. But I love this imagery. It's one of my wife's favorite shirts that she wore until she couldn't wear it anymore. It's easy to just wish that life were different. Feel me? Wish there wasn't a pandemic. Well, it's going on, baby. We better embrace life and the beauty within, because don't want to waste time. I don't know about you, but I don't know how much time I have left. Certainly not as much as I've lived. And people say, if only if, if only if, if only if, if only if. If you've watched the Olympics, perhaps you've seen a commercial. It is of a little girl who's swimming in a body of water, and clearly she's challenged in the fact that her limb is gone below her waist. And then there's a voiceover, and then there's a woman who calls a man and a woman and says, well, good news, we found a little child for your adoption, but you need to know that there are great challenges, great limitations, for she's ill and they're going to have to amputate her legs, and so it will be very, very difficult and very, very challenging. And the woman has the phone and she says, we are so excited. We know it's not going to be easy, but we can't wait to meet her. And then, I don't know if Disney did it. I mean, I don't know if it's a true story and you'd like to think that this little girl grew up to become a Paralympian. That's not the point. The point is, bloom where you're planted. How long have you been married? Did everything happen as you wanted? How long have you been a parent? I would die for our children, but at 21 and 19 and 16, they still do some insanely stupid things. And you wonder, haven't you been listening at all? Or they go this way or that way in life, and you say, that's not what I intended for you, so I'm not all in. Bloom where you're planted. If you have employees and something comes up that's different and he or she can adapt, they're great. On a sunny day with no wind, it's easy to do virtually anything, metaphorically and literally. But when you're a champion, you can overcome those things because you bloom where you're planted. Rolf Jacobson, remember I talked about him being the editor of that book? I couldn't help. I don't want to talk about him too much because he knows he's great. I think he's great. I tell him he's great. But at the age of 18, he was 6'4". Living in Mason City, Iowa, he was the number 1 tennis player in the state. Larry, I know you love tennis. He was the number 1, not number 2, number 1 in the entire state. He got sick. They had to amputate his legs. Bloom where you're planted. For many, many years, he went down to Gustavus Adolphus College and he held a tennis camp. He was in a wheelchair, and you'd have all these little teenage boys in particular would come, you can't play tennis, you don't have legs. Okay, you want to play? And Rolf would beat many of them in a wheelchair, changing the perception of what it is to be an athlete. I remember when I was in seminary, he would often drive his car. And I would ride because he wanted to drive. And why drive when you can be driven? We went to the post office one day, and I got out of the car, and He got out of his car, and this little boy was going by with his mom, and he was at the age where they just say whatever comes to their mind. And they walked by, and the little boy saw the guy with no legs was driving, and the guy with legs wasn't. And he said, "Mama, the guy with no legs is driving the car." Bloom where you're planted. You know what Rolf did? He wheeled over to the mom and son, and he looked at the mom. He says, "Okay, it's only a few steps." Took the little boy over, said, "This is how I have gas and speed, and this is how I brake." He could have been bitter. He could have been sarcastic. But he bloomed where he was planted. One more story. Every year when I go away with my buddies, we went into Rice Lake, just Rolf and myself, a number of years ago. We ended up at Culver's because the Rice Lake, selection committee isn't that huge. And so we were going to get a burger, and we were there, and I noticed that whenever the young man would speak to Rolf in his order, he would shout. But when he spoke to me, he would talk in a normal tone. "Rolf, you want fries with that?" Me. "Want some fries?" He goes away and gets our order. You know what Rolf said to me? The guy who has a THD from Princeton. There are a lot of people who think that since I have no legs, I'm also hard of hearing. Was he mean to that young man? No. Was he gracious and kind? Yes. Bloom where you are planted. Things will assail us, but God is good, and you are good, and God will bring you to goodness. And even though things don't happen as we want, I used to think, my friends, before I did this for long enough, that when I met people who were older and they had a good constitution in their spirit, I thought that life had just been innately kind to them. And then I worked with people and realized that the people who have metal in them, that have faith incarnate inside, is they will say, "It took a left turn, but God is with me." My wife would attest that I'm kind of bright, but many times just a numbskull. Is that in my mind, when I'm going to go to some place I don't know where I'm going, I envision it in a particular place. Like I think if I'm going to go to a wedding venue, I think it's on the right side of the road. And the nice person who's in my GPS, this lady will go, "You want to turn left?" I'm like, nope, it's on the right. That is kind of like bloom where you're planted. Be open. That even the things you have in your life that assail you might actually in the end be better for you, be better for me. An example of vocation in real life. I have to read this story. I was sitting in my wife's office. If you don't know, my wife works here as Director of Marketing and Communications. She's in the office right next to me, and I'm oftentimes found there for many reasons, but also she directs marketing and communications. And I was having lunch with her, and John Nolan, who's a bookkeeper here, just a wonderful man, came in and started talking about a vacation that his daughter and their 2 children had taken. And so they were talking about a vacation, but those of you who write sermons, Penny included, you're always working. And so when he started talking about this story, I said, well, they were on vacation, but this fits with vocation. And so I'll read the email that the mom sent me. After watching many times and loving the movie Dolphin Tale, our family planned a special trip to Clearwater, Florida to visit the Clearwater Marine Aquarium. We had hopes of learning about the aquarium's animal rescue and rehabilitation mission, seeing Winter, the famous dolphin who lost her tail and now wears a prosthetic tail, as well as exploring where the movie was filmed. As a family, we soaked up the educational information throughout the facility and live presentations. One of the fun activities of the day was a Family Feud aquarium quiz show. Our family was selected to play and met an enthusiastic, caring employee leading the game show in costume. After the show, she said she could tell our kids were very interested in the experience and our family were fans of the movie. Although the prize for participating was supposed to be pride, she quietly offered us movie posters signed by the actors and a chance for each of us to hold the prosthetic dolphin tail and provided some special facts about it. A later presentation we attended, the same employee was playing a scientist creating a gel ingredient used in the dolphin's tail. She selected our daughter as her helper in hopes of talking to us afterwards. She had spoken to her manager in between shows, and they were excited to take us behind the scenes to see some special movie props and offer some undivided dolphin Q&A time. Their generous gift of kindness and personalized time and information made our family's experience memorable and well beyond our expectations for our special visit. There is an asterisk. Actually, it's two, because two is more than one. It's more important. The employees did not know until after that they had provided not only entertainment for our family, but held a special place in our hearts. Shortly after watching the movie a couple of years ago, we had an extended family member of our own family, very close to us, lose her leg through amputation. As we struggled to share the sad news with our children and look for resources, Dolphin Tale, the movie, had provided an encouraging example of hope and coping for our young children. Therefore, the two employees' caring attitudes had blessed our family far more than even they had expected or even realized. So, there's Winter on the left, still alive, still in that aquarium. So there's that wonderful first instructor, and there's a little scientist who took them under her wing. And there's one of the grandchildren, the daughters holding the prosthetic tail. And you now know the backstory. This is their family relative who lost her leg. But Dolphin Tail became something to buoy them. Then they go there, and someone who's being paid probably $11.50 an hour showed up that day and did a whole lot more than talk about a dolphin movie. So then you have, look at that. That's what happens when we embrace our vocation. You're not just given a tour. You're not just chatting with the neighbor. You're not just having a hallway conversation with somebody. You and I can potentially make their day, their week, their month. You know what I realized? I have a lot of important things in my calendar. In retrospect, the best moments are the ones that I didn't plan for. And there they are. By God. And I mean that. By God. So what's the point? Vocation. The thing that you and I do that was given to us to be done in the way that each of us do for the benefit of those we are doing it for. Vocation. Go in peace. Serve the Lord. Amen.
We hope you found this week's message helpful as you think about how you will live out your faith each day. If you would like to support the ministries at St. Andrew Lutheran Church, you can do so by having your credit card information available and then texting a gift to 952-260-9007. Thank you, and God bless.